Ahoy! The new World PTR has received another patch, and this is a pretty important one in terms of weapon balance. You already know about the Blunderbuss changes that I talked about yesterday, but there is a lot more in here, so let's dive into it. The first thing this patch introduces is the Fury of the Spriggan event. We'll talk about that separately because it's its own whole beast. There are some interesting things about it, but there are also some issues with it at the moment, so we'll talk about that soon. The Empyrean Forge gets a variety of fixes, but I don't think it's particularly important for us to talk about those in detail either, because most of you probably haven't seen the Forge yet. I haven't even seen it because I haven't been able to find a group for it on PTR yet. But the real meat of things starts here with the combat changes to the Fire Staff. Flare, which is the AoE upgrade for the Fire Staff, added a trade-off to the Flare upgrade. When upgrading the AoE, the projectile speed will now travel 25% slower. At the same time, fixed an issue where the flare upgrade allowed heavy attacks to backstab, and with flare attacks could not be blocked. So in general, I would say this is a more consistent use of the ability for sure, but obviously with the projectile being slower, this is a trade-off you need to consider, because in situations where you're heavy attacking but you're only hitting one target, which is still going to be many situations, this is mainly a downside. So I think this is something that people will still likely consider for wars at least, or for PvE, where this big AoE damage just has a lot of value, but in other situations they may be like, okay, I'd rather have my faster projectile, my normal projectile, than having the AoE because it's not really important for me in, say, OPR for example, or in arenas. Flamethrower gets a fair bit of an overhaul. Reduced how frequent Flamethrower can hit and then increase the damage accordingly. This was a fix to an issue where Flamethrower was making dots tick twice as fast, greatly increasing the damage. So the Flamethrower was changed from 50% weapon damage every half second to 100% weapon damage every second, and because of that, the accelerating Flamethrower perk also needed to be updated to be more clear on the activation and reduce the amount of stacks of smolder that need to be on the target to trigger the effect from 3 to 2, because obviously it takes longer to stack the smolder on the target now, so it takes longer for this effect to take place. And Heat Up had a fix where the effect, it's a dodge which applies a smolder, would not deal any damage with the dot that was applied. I don't know what circumstance caused this. I think this was not always, but either way, now it should be working. Overall, a few nerfs to the Fire Staffs here. Nothing completely insane, I would say, but definitely something that will affect the performance a little bit. But that said, the Fire Staff also got massive buffs coming onto the PTR, so it'll still feel stronger than it did before the patch anyways. I don't think these changes on this scale will take away from that. Maybe for Flamethrower builds in particular, this will be a bit of a hit, but I don't think Flamethrower builds will be the priority next patch anyways, to be honest. Hatchet gets a nerf to defy death. Changed health gain from 50% of max HP to 50% of base HP. Health value before it's modified by con or any other bonuses. This is interesting because I was wondering why they were doing this with max HP, given some situations where a tank especially could get a significant amount of extra health through this, and I was wondering if that was intended, so apparently not. Also fix an issue where hard gem abilities would ignore the Defy Death Hatchet ability. This probably has something to do with the sheathing during hard gem abilities, unless this is referring to enemy hard gem abilities. I'm not quite sure which one this is exactly talking about. And they also fixed some incorrect attribute values on multiple Season 1 hatchets. Now we're back where we were yesterday at the Blunderbuss, and we actually have actual values for all the changes this time. SLOTH Shrapnel Blast reduced the stamina damage dealt by each pellet by 50%. This is still going to be a very strong stamina damage tool, because beforehand you could, like I said, or like I showed in the clip, blow through a tank's entire stamina with this when they were holding a heavy, like a tower shield, but now it'll still be a significant amount of stamina damage, just not all of your stamina basically. Along with that, they increased how much the SLOTH Shrapnel Blast damage is reduced per consecutive pellet hit from 15 to 20%, so this will be a fair bit of a damage hit as well, though probably not completely massive either, to be honest. For Clawshot, they adjusted the cancel window on Clawshot to reduce the burst damage potential when used in combos, and some people were already telling me about this and are in fact correct as far as I was able to test on PTR. It seems that it straight up is no cancel anymore. The cancel windows in this case, meaning you cannot cancel it. Once you're hooked to an enemy, you're flying to them and the cancel is no longer possible. Unless the high ping that I had on PTR was a factor in this. I'm not entirely sure about that. But it seems that you simply have to go in with a claw shot now when you use it. But you have to keep in mind here that Clawshot isn't even that popular. Like, Clawshot is very popular in OPR, but in wars especially, where Blunderbuss are primarily used either by tanks or by medium mages, from what I've seen for the most part, you don't even see them using Clawshot very often. That's not really what is usually necessary for them. They have Net Shot, they have Azor's Shrapnel Blast, and they have the Splitting Grenades, especially for the anti-heal as well. So I don't think that much will change there, and I think the Blunderbuss will be extremely strong next patch either way. I don't think the Clawshot adjustment here is going to be a major factor, even though it obviously hurts the Burst Cancel combo with Clawshot in particular a lot. But to be honest, that one always felt a little bit unintended and buggy to me, just because you're basically choosing to not use the ability and purely use it for a reset, which was fair enough, but it didn't feel like that was the intended design for that ability at any point, in my opinion. That brings us to the Rapier, the change that I talked about quite a few days ago that I was hoping wouldn't happen, but now it's happening. Flourish added the stagger back into Flourish, and this is likely on the first hit, and because it's Flourish and not Finish, and reduce the damage from Flourish from 90 to 60%. Again, this will affect the damage output in PvE. There are PvE builds that are using Flourish and Finish. I like to emphasize this. Some of the best speedrunners in the world are using this, in fact. So yeah, this is something that definitely affects PvE, and while this damage value alone is not the biggest damage factor in Flourish and Finish, obviously with the second hit and the proc of bleeds and everything being bigger factors overall, it is still a damage factor that is affected here. But it also will kind of make sense once we talk about the damage output of different weapons on the new patch. See that, you might be like, yeah, okay, fair enough. So yeah, I'm personally still not very happy about this, but I can understand why it's being done. And then along with that, Flurry fixed an issue where the bleed applied by the Rapier's Flurry would trigger a screen shake, so that was probably some leftover from the stagger that it previously used to be. We're back at the Musket, and this time it's really interesting. So the Musket is getting a change here that just says accuracy, reduce the Musket's camera rotation accuracy penalty by 20%. Now, the bloom, the scope and all of that stuff, it's still not at all matching up with how precise the Musket is. It's all completely misleading. You have to actually shoot targets to see what the bloom is, how much spread you actually have, because the targeter tells you nothing, just absolutely nothing at all, which is very unfortunate, and I was hoping they would change that on the patch. I guess it's a bit more work than they can do before Season 1 comes out. Now, Male Oreo has already done some testing with this, and I'm going to show you a clip here of him using basically no accuracy on the weapon and just, you know, just free firing and seeing how much he can hit. And you can see that, well, he hits a lot of shots without any accuracy perk at all, like activated just after these changes. So I'm not quite sure if they have done more under the hood changes than they're saying here, or if this accuracy change that they're doing here affects something else as well, but it's weird once again. So you may actually end up not needing the accuracy perk on the Musket, especially if you're planning to play like mid-range-ish and not super long range, where it may have more of an effect. But yeah, it's still out. The jury's still out on that. Also because at the moment, Male Oreo is testing this on the PTR on very high ping because he plays from New Zealand. So obviously it's not super representative. And in PvP things are different as well, and ping comes into play even more. So yeah, we'll have to see on live if accuracy will be a needed perk on the Musket or not. But either way, it seems like this change has once again overall shifted things. I will link the video at the end in the description as well, so you can check that out for yourself if you want to see more about the new changes from somebody who has been using Musket a lot. There are also very important perk changes. Fortifying Perforate reduced the 40 per stack from being 9.6% on armor and 17% on weapons to 5.8% on armor and 10% on weapons, so it's now 30% maximum. I don't really think that that's like a super big deal. Obviously, last patch this would have been insane, and it will be a factor for heavy spear users in particular, where Fortify still is somewhat more valuable, but for a light armor user, this doesn't really make a difference, and for a medium armor user, the difference will be relatively small as well. So yeah, fair enough. It's a change, I guess. But the next change is model empowerment. Hello. Talking about Musket things. Added back the ability to have the duration refresh with each kill. Now, this is very, very spicy, because if we look at this, Moral Empowerment now works as follows. Player kills grant a stack of 2% damage bonus that lasts for 2 minutes until death or game transition, with a maximum of 10 stacks. So, cannot be cleansed, blah blah blah, you know that stuff. So it's a 20% max empower still. And for someone who can sit very far away safely in the backline like a Musket, this may very well be viable again. It just depends on if you can get a kill every 2 minutes, which I think in OPR especially is possible as a Musket player. Like, seeing the scoreboards, I'm pretty sure a good Musket player can consistently or somewhat consistently do that. So yeah, I could see this being a fair bit more interesting again, especially with armor also being nerfed and kills probably being more frequent in general, or at least Fortify being nerfed. So yeah, I could see that this is a usable perk now. I don't know if you would want to use it like in many other places. You probably wouldn't want to use it in wars all that much because it's more risky. You probably wouldn't want to use it on melees all that much because it's more risky again. Yeah, it really depends. It's just other perks take higher priority, especially with Keen also being something that I think a lot of people will value more on the rings now. So we'll see if you have a slot for it and if you think it's effective enough. But it's definitely not a complete trash perk after this. Also, all elemental attunements are seeing a nerf, reducing the damage from 18 to 14%. I think this was absolutely unnecessary for a long time, but even after that it's still very strong. As long as the proc is once per second, I think this is gonna be very, very good. Obviously, it makes other perks a little bit more effective in comparison in some situations, but that highly depends on the target as well and what they have, how much resilient they have, for example, if you're looking at crit and stuff like that. Generally, I think attunements will definitely still be good, just not quite as overwhelming, with this being roughly a 20% reduction to the damage output. Some fixes to the season rewards, all just kind of PTR stuff mainly. But then for the musical instruments, the XP for leveling up the musical instrument trade skill is adjusted to be more in line with the new music XP curve. We have a very interesting change towards the end here. Shard of Consecrated Iron is now an eligible drop for players of all levels. It was previously only an eligible drop for low-level players on named AI. And I want to show you what that actually looks like. So this is Shard of Consecrated Iron on the live server, and if you look here at the drop tables on New World database on nwdb.info, then you can see the requirement here, level 1 to 45 almost everywhere, and you will have some mobs here that are actually higher level, I think, like 55 in there. It doesn't even make sense with the content level, so yeah, it was just weird. It was just not a proper drop table like many other crafting items, but we're getting one fixed here at least. And now, this is the new version. So look at this here, this is 20 pages, like 11 per page. We have a little bit more now. We have 53 pages now. Content level limitations is still there for some of them, but others are content level 46 plus, and you see that you have level 60 mobs in here. And many of these are like a variety of different mobs. There are expedition mobs, there are brimstone mobs, like expedition bosses, all that. So there is definitely a lot more places where you can get these now. Look here, Bathyquet, this Cudgel, for example, up in Heliopolis. So really a lot of mobs that can drop it. I think it's not going to be a super frequent drop still. It's probably still going to be one of the rarer drops in terms of, you know, sharing this with a lot of other craft mods that you can possibly get from the same mobs. But overall, it's definitely going to be much, much easier to get this, and I think the value will go down significantly. Now, I told you recently that it will probably be more valuable in the sense that you can craft it with elemental aversion, and then it's the only bottleneck in that craft to cheaply craft gear that has a good chance to roll elemental aversion plus freedom plus resilient. So that will be even more accessible now. So because of that, I think the price of freedom will not completely drop, because again, it'll still be not the most frequent drop in the game, and it will still be very useful in this particular craft. But definitely expect the prices to not stay as ridiculous as they are when people can actually farm this properly. And I'm very glad that that's the case, and I think this is a general change they should really be making for all items, for all crafting mods, especially for those that are valued by pretty much anyone playing the game. There's some season pass changes, mainly flame cores no longer bind on pickup, which is very important. So you can actually trade them now. They're also added to the trading post and all that. And then there is a category that has been modified for some season activities and added a new season activity task to craft flame cores. So they're really putting a lot of emphasis on that. They also did a lot of things for the season XP. You can see the full list here. Not really that important, to be honest. Most of these really not providing much XP even after this still. And the activities themselves are still the more important thing to get season XP. But they're at least adding something, I suppose. It's just kind of arbitrary, I feel. This last one is a little bit more interesting. For every 10,000 player XP you earn from any activity, you now get 25 seasonal XP. So this could come in handy here and there. We have the similar thing with the Azoth Salt, so I'm kind of familiar with how it works. But yeah, we'll see if this is at all useful or not. And we have a bunch of smaller fixes here. You can look at them if you want. But other than that, we still need to talk about Limited Version and the new event. So if you'd like to see that, consider subscribing and clicking the bell. Also, if you're interested in an upcoming trading tips video but want to get the tips early, then consider supporting me on Patreon. The video will hopefully be done at some point next week. Thanks to my patrons for supporting this video, and thank you for watching. SLOTH out.